Welcome. I'm Reverend Sue Browning. I serve the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton in Maryland and the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, and it is good to all be together. It's been a few weeks since the two congregations had a shared service. Part of that is I've been on vacation, and it's just been wonderful to watch the variety of services and leadership that have really filled Sundays with very spirit-filled, heartfelt services. I think pretty much the whole world knows at this point that one of the great joys we had during the time of vacation was our son Daniel married Rachel. We had a small backyard wedding, and it was absolutely lovely. So the other just observation, if you're wondering where we're filming from today, this is my office at the UU Fellowship at Easton, and we're going to give this a try to see how the acoustics are and to see how the setting works. So please let us know as you have any observations. So we gather each week to pay attention to what is around us. We gather with intent for comfort. We gather to learn. We gather to challenge one another. That's what we do as a congregation. That's what lots of different faith traditions do weekly. Annually, all of the different Unitarian Universalist congregations gather as sort of a congregation of congregations, and it's called the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. Historically, we go to a place, usually someplace in the United States, occasionally to Canada, and thousands of people gather. This year was a little different. It was virtual, as our services are for our congregations, and yet we did all those same things. So I invite you to join us this morning as myself and three different members, Carl, Ann, and Dick, who were also at the assembly. We share some of the things we learned. We share some of the spiritual experiences and the ways we were changed at the conference. If you're finding us online and you haven't been exposed to our congregations before, please check out our website, track us down, ask questions, call the offices. We would be happy to get to know you in our virtual settings and to find out what brought you to the service and to explain anything that you have questions about. So welcome. We begin our services with a chalice lighting. And our chalice lighting words today are from Bruce Southworth. For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul. Do check the chalice ahead of time. So in a moment, the words to our opening hymn, Morning Has Broken, will come up on your screen, and we invite you to participate in whatever way is comfortable for you. So one of the things about General Assembly is to learn about the local area where we're going to meet. And this year we were supposed to have our General Assembly in Providence, Rhode Island, and that obviously didn't work out, but they kept General Assembly focused on that region of the country. And we specifically spent quite a bit of time learning about some of the Native American issues that are still present today for the tribes in Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts. One of the things I recall very distinctly about General Assembly this year was the opening worship ceremony on the first night when they opened up the whole assembly used a lot of Native American ritual. There were a lot of references and actions, embodiment, to call forward our connections to our ancestors. When I heard I heard this as a call to reach deep and to imagine the cloud of witnesses. Imagine all those who have come before us, who are cheering us on, who are holding us accountable in ever so gentle and loving ways. I heard it as an invitation to draw strength from our roots and to trust in our shared vision. So in that spirit, I invite us now into a time of reflection, a time of meditation. I invite you to breathe deep, to center where you are, to call forward your connections, your sense of reach to the ancestors in the broadest sense. We begin with words from Black Elk. I was standing on the highest mountain of them all, and round about beneath me was the whole hoop of the world. And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell, and I understood more than I saw. For I was seeing in a sacred manner the shapes of all things in the spirit and the shape of all shapes as they must live together as one being. And I saw that the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter the children of all parents. And I saw that it was holy. Spirit of life, Spirit of love, bring our hearts together in this time, in this summer of unique challenge. Let us sense the many ways we are interconnected. Let us sense the many hoops that make one circle. We offer gratitude for all that is around us that we did not create. We offer gratitude for moments of kindness, moments of care. And we come together knowing the world faces challenges. We come with our own frustrations, our own fears. In it all, in the joy and in the sorrow and in the uncertainty, may we be called to see in a sacred manner, to feel in a sacred manner. So as we feel in this breath of connection, the many hoops forming one circle, may we be reminded that we are not alone. Amen, and blessed be. One of the rituals we have in our congregations is to share our personal joys and sorrows with one another. And I'm going to do so by lighting actually a single candle today, representing all of the different joys and sorrows I'll read. If you would like a joy and sorrow included, please try to get it into the office. Into the office or to me by Thursday. We're going to up it a day. And to remember that for those who have been sharing in the summer discussion series in Chestertown, there is an opportunity to share your joys and sorrows real time during those services. So I'm going to go ahead and light the candle, and that will represent a whole host of things I'm going to read out next. So I still feel called, I think we all do, to recognize the challenges and losses in our society associated with the pandemic. We light the candle for those who have struggled, those who are ill, those who have died, those who have recovered, the many challenges and decisions that we are faced with, and in honor of the first responders and so many different types of essential workers. So the candle represents that. The candle today also represents the life of Representative John Lewis. He was a committed, loving man. He led with courage. He led by example. May we honor him by carrying on in his wake. And the civil rights movement lost other folks this week. Charles Evers and Reverend C.T. Vivian, also critical leaders who have forged a path ahead. We remember them. We have a great joy to share. Dick and Barbara from Easton had their first great-grandchild born on July 23rd. His name is Elliot Schaefer, and he was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and mom, son, and family are all doing well. So congratulations. We hear from John in Chestertown, who shares, last weekend, Marcy and I visited my cousin in Erie, Pennsylvania. She's fighting melanoma, and it had metastasized throughout her body, but thankfully not to her organs. She has started an experimental immunology treatment in Pittsburgh, and it seems to be doing well. And she seemed good. She seemed hale and hearty, and it was good even with having to be socially distanced to see her. So we hold her in our love and prayers, and are grateful that that visit had a chance to happen. For the many joys that have been spoken and those in our hearts, let's take a moment in silence to reflect and to hold so much that goes on in our lives. Amen. So now we're going to start doing our reflections on General Assembly, and Carl, Ann, and Dick are going to share their reflections. We've actually met, we shared some of our own experiences, some of the things we learned, and then there'll be some music, and then we'll offer the sermon. I did want to offer the context that this year it was possible for more people to attend. There was actually probably one of the very biggest General Assemblies they've ever had. There were 4,900 registered voters. The lower costs, the virtual access made it possible. But even with 4 of us there, I will share that we just covered a slice of General Assembly. Um, there's the business of the denomination, there's worship, there's learning workshops. And while I've usually gone alone, it was great to be able to come back and reflect with Carl, Ann, and Dick. And I just want to share, you're just going to get a snapshot of what we experienced. And you should know there's more. It was a great experience, lots we could reflect upon. So now, our reflections.
Reverend Sue asked us to address 3 questions regarding the UUA General Assembly, which we recently attended. First question, most profound thing I learned at GA. Actually, there were 2 things. First, a predominant message expressed throughout the General Assembly was, we are living in unique times and now is the time for change. This is the result of 3 key factors: COVID-19 pandemic, massive Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and global climate change. And I would like to include a quote by Naomi Klein, who presented the Ware Lecture at GA. As Unitarian Universalists, I would say that this is your moment. Your principles are visionary and the world is catching up. We are in a really special moment in history and we need to make the most of it. Second thing was from Dina Gilio Whitaker, written in her book, As Long as Grass Grows. Coronavirus shows we must change how we live or face self-destruction. The spread of the virus has been a massive wake-up call for humankind, and not just in a scientific, logistical, or even personal sense. We should think of COVID-19 as a warning. We must change the way we inhabit the planet, or otherwise face self-destruction caused by our own negligence, if not by the pandemic, then by environmental destruction, or both. Second question, ideas for the congregation that we might like to introduce. I was impressed by the importance given to Indigenous peoples' issues and concerns during General Assembly, plus the presentations and discussions of these issues by 3 eloquent Indigenous featured speakers at GA. First, Natalie Martinez. Secondly, Dina Gilio Whitaker, author of As Long as Grass Grows, and Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, author of An Indigenous People's History of the U.S., plus An Indigenous People's History of the U.S. for Young People. I have copies of both books by Dina Gilio Whitaker that I would like to offer to our RE programs to present to our youth. And then secondly, the Doctrine of Discovery, which was signed into law by Chief Justice John Marshall in 1823, which resulted in many of the injustices experienced by the Indigenous people. This became the legal rationale for continued violent appropriations of Indian lands and engine powering federal Indian law in place today. After the court's articulation of the Doctrine of Discovery, President Jackson would sign the Indian Removal Act in 1830, expelling the Cherokee and the other 4 so-called 5 civilized tribes from their homelands in Georgia and the broader South, setting the stage for the removal of federal Indian policy. And the 3 recent legal actions that took place to address the injustices resulting from the Doctrine of Discovery. First, the recent Supreme Court decision to honor the treaties that the reservations in Oklahoma for the 5 civilized tribes would be recognized. These tribes included the Chickasaws, the Muskogees, Seminoles, Choctaws, and Chickasaws. Secondly, the Dakota Access Pipeline was declared illegal because of environmental impact study violations. And then third, the renaming of the Washington Redskins football team. Third question, ways the pandemic opens doors to something new. And here I would reference the Where lecture given by Naomi Klein, and which is based on her book, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal. The book is made up of long-form essays reporting the climate crisis not only as a profound political challenge, but as a spiritual and imaginative one as well. Klein makes the case that we will rise to the existential challenge of climate change only if we are willing to transform the systems that produce this crisis. In her book, On Fire, she captures the burning urgency of the climate crisis, as well as the fiery energy of a rising political movement demanding a catalytic Green New Deal. Klein lists in her book 9 reasons how the Green New Deal can address the global climate crisis.
This was the 4th Unitarian Universalist General Assembly I've attended. Over the 31 years that I've been a declared UU, I say it that way because I think many of us, I feel as though we've been UUs maybe all our lives, but finally put a designation on what our spiritual beings are about. Even though I've adapted to Zooming over recent months, a digital experience of General Assembly is very different from being there in person with 4,000 other Unitarian Universalists in the same location. Imagine. I missed walking around to the exhibits and the various booths occupied by the UU-related organizations like Blue, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, and to the groups like Small Group Ministry Network, and to the LGBTQ oriented groups of people as well. Experiencing the diversity of appearance and spiritual orientations and the various varieties of people that you see at General Assembly is really pretty amazing. I know that Unitarians, Universalists often are unhappy about the lack of diversity in their congregations and in the denomination as a whole, but there's quite a kaleidoscope of people to see and to talk to at General Assembly. Even though I missed all these things at in-person General Assembly, I was happy to have experienced some of the workshops that I went to. Two sessions I attended were closely related, though they were about 2 different ethnic groups, African Americans and Native Americans. The doctrine of discovery, colonialism, subjugation, cultural obliteration, persecution, scourging, enslavement, loss of personhood, white European supremacy were common elements in the history of both groups. Reparations was the focus of one of the sessions I attended. I have to admit, sheepishly, that in the past, I had not probably fully understood, but certainly not appreciated what reparations truly means. I thought it was giving money through some system of payment to African Americans to compensate them for the difficulties that have been imposed on them. I wondered, is this hush money? After all, the perpetrators were way in the past. Many people who are living today had nothing to do with what has happened, although, of course, much of it is still going on. So I was glad that I attended this workshop because it was presented by 5 African Americans, and they got into what they believe should be part of reparations. Part of it is financial, but there's so much more. Some of the elements of reparations the presenters suggested included institute specific curricula in the schools about African American culture prior to the enslavement, as well as about African Americans who have contributed to the history of the United States. Black history should have more than 1 month devoted to it. It should be a topic integrated into all grade levels, elementary through high school and college. They suggested that white power, white supremacy, white privilege should be taught to all students, not just Black children and white students, but everyone. They wanted to have the miseducation of all children overturned. And they wanted children of all colors to be empowered equally. They suggested changes in the training of law enforcement officers and decriminalizing some law infractions that overpopulate our criminal justice system. And while at the same time incarcerating a predominance of people of color, especially African Americans. And they suggested in particular decreasing the number of people who have been arrested for minor drug offenses. They also wanted there to be greater attention to the physical and mental health of African Americans because of genetic expression of generational trauma. They have been expected to endure. They are in much higher medical jeopardy than white people. All institutions need to make changes to their policies. These institutions include schools, the criminal justice system, units of government, and churches. It was suggested that all Unitarian Universalist churches have a reparations committee. Although I was a little concerned when I first attended this workshop, I am very glad that I did because it certainly clarified things for me and definitely changed my point of view about the whole topic of reparations.
As a first-time attendee at the UUA General Assembly, I was very pleased with the wealth of knowledge and experiences available to attendees. The virtual worship services were rich and diverse, and many interesting workshops were presented. Having a virtual GA has some advantages like reduced cost for attendees, but reduced personal contact was a downside. As a delegate, I attended the general session where business was conducted and voted for proposed changes in the bylaws. including embodying human rights in UUA business decisions regarding investments. Overall, I found the virtual GA to be a worthwhile and enriching experience, and would recommend it to anyone who has an interest in deepening your understanding of our faith and how the UUA is leading the way into the future. I attended a workshop reporting on the successful process used to update the mission and vision of the UU Church in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Their process was inclusive and allowed the members of the congregation to engage fully throughout the process. I recommended to the UUFE co-presidents that we engage more fully with our members as we complete the updating of the UUFE mission and vision. I was most impressed with the final report of the UUA Commission on Institutional Change. I highlighted this year's virtual GA. The Commission's report and presentation was a culmination of a 3-year process initiated in 2017. The published report, Widening the Circle of Concern, lays out 10 areas of recommendations for us to become a truly anti-oppressive faith community. It is essential reading for every Unitarian Universalist, with recommendations for the UUA, UU organizations and seminaries, and all of our congregations. The report is voluminous, a total of 228 pages, and will take significant time to digest and determine what action steps might be appropriate at the congregational level. One possible option to consider going forward would be for each congregation to form a team to carefully evaluate the many important recommendations in the final report, Widening the Circle of Concern, and then to recommend possible action steps to their boards for consideration. The objective should be to focus on improving equity, diversity, and inclusion in our congregations. In conclusion, I would like to highlight several important distinctions that are made in the report that will be of interest to members. Anti-racism is not equal to racial justice. While anti-racism is an appropriate and needed response to racial inequality, it is not enough to be against something. Racial justice is a proactive assertion of what we are for: justice, equity, fairness for all. Racial justice is not equal to equality. Things can be equal, but still not fair. The goal of racial justice is not to make everything and everyone the same, but rather to make things fair. Equality can be an effective concept, that is, equal opportunity that we can use, but equitable outcomes are the goal. Racial justice is not equal to diversity. There can be diversity or variety without equity or fairness. Integration of and variety of different races can be beneficial, but it is not sufficient to produce fairness or equity. Diversity can be a tool for advancing equity, but equity is the goal. Racial equity is not equal to multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is a belief that different cultures within a society should all be given importance. Racism is a system of social hierarchy based on the belief that white people have more value than non-whites. If we ignore the power dynamics embedded in social construction of race and attend only to its cultural manifestations, racism will persist, even if things appear to be multicultural on the surface. Intentions are not equal to impact. in pursuing racial justice, focus on equity and fairness in opportunities, outcomes, and impacts. Assess policies and actions based on whether they help or hurt communities of color, regardless of intentions.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Oh, for each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth, keepers of faith, makers of peace, and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life, and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage.
So clearly, General Assembly was rich with learning opportunities, and our Unitarian Universalist Association is making do. They're working with the technology, they're adapting formats, and it was accessible this year to many more participants because of location, because of the cost. But as Ann and Dick mentioned, it felt different. It felt different than other conferences you might have been to. There was no bumping into colleagues or friends. There was no debriefing right after you went to a workshop or a session to figure out what your new questions were, or sharing a meal right at that point. Truth be told, I think I felt more of a distant observer this year at GA than I did an engaged learner and participant. Life nowadays feels limited in that way with so much being virtual, and GA was no exception. I'm trying to let that reality sink in. I think that's an important part of my learning. And part of the reason I think I felt like a distant observer, part of that was on me. I like to feel a place. I like the feel of my favorite coffee shop where I usually go to write, or I like preaching to a congregation of actual real people. I like sharing a glass of wine or a drink and having some shared cheese and crackers that we can talk over and enjoy that live experience too. I love live connection, and I'm missing live connection. So for virtual GA, what showing up actually meant was you had to get on your computer, you had to make sure you had the right passwords and links, which they made pretty easy, but it's still computer stuff. But once connected, I often took advantage of the availability of virtual. I found myself one day with my computer on my counter and I'm unloading the dishwasher. That worked pretty well. So another day I was folding laundry. One day during one of the business meetings, I said, I could listen to it on my phone. I took a walk, phone in my pocket, earbuds in. And when they said you needed to vote, I would just stop. You could click the appropriate procedural or other vote. I was a delegate, and I could move on. So the distance part was the distant observer probably fits because that's what I was doing a lot of. But I want to share that for the Where lecture. That's when Naomi Klein spoke. It's one of the central lecturers of the event. My husband managed to punch enough of the correct buttons. I wish I could say I did it myself, I didn't. And he managed to get her lecture on our full living room TV. The two of us watched it together. We could talk a little bit as it happened, and then the way it worked out, we had dinner immediately afterwards. We could discuss it. He's really interested in climate change. I was fascinated by some of the ways she was looking at education, and the experience was different. I could also remember hearing Brian Stevenson at the Where lecture. So I think not wanting to be a distant observer involves that commitment, that intentionality. I think that's part of my important learning because a lot of what we're doing nowadays is virtual. It's sort of a mundane aha moment for me, but I'm wondering what it will help me do as I work with our educators. What it helps me do is I think about our students who are continually asked to do things virtually. What are the challenges they're going to face? Where do we place virtual church in our schedule? I'm not saying it's not okay to watch it any given way, but it is a whole different experience when we show intention, when we do something. So as I walked my way through GA and as I looked back on some of my learning and the speakers and programs, I think there were a lot of messages that were centered around, or at least what I needed to hear, was about intentionality. Maybe that's the place where when we have to balance so many things in our lives, thinking about what it really means to be intentional was helpful to me. I've thought a little bit, at this point in the life, we've got this pandemic going on. We're at 5 months, and there's a part of our lives that sort of says we have all this time in the world. Our appointments have been canceled or only partially rescheduled. We've had travel postponed and rescheduled and stores closed. And yet, all the tasks of daily living are still there, and they're made more complex by trying to do them safely. We're processing all these losses with our schools, with our church, with our family, all the things that are just different. We're making do, we're doing our best we can, but it is hard. We've also been called into a new awareness, maybe new for some of us, maybe more intense for some of us, on what equity means and what's our part there. Then I think of all these things. I think of balancing a tray full of cups, and it's in a bad movie where it's going like this. And I also think of everyone's personal challenges, challenges with health, challenges with employment, challenges with the normal things that happen in our lives and in our communities. We balance as we can, but we can't do everything with total focus. We need to make choices. The spiritual guide Deepak Chopra offers, whatever you put your attention on will grow stronger in your life. Whatever you take your attention away from will wither, disintegrate, and disappear. I think it's okay that some things do that. They fade out off to the sides. So one of the things I find myself doing at General Assembly, and this wasn't unique to this year, is I often find myself looking for a couple simplifying principles that remind me not to overthink, not to overstudy, but to trust where my heart is leading me, to trust where that intentional focus might lead. So one session that I attend every year at General Assembly is put on by a group called Equal Access. Put two U's where you have equal access, and it is the group that advocates for full inclusion for those living with disabilities. This year, the workshop was entitled Dismantling Ableism, not unlike all of the other places of oppression that need to be dismantled. So I want to give you a little background. I want to give you a little story here. I actually started getting involved with this group back in 2016. It was right after UUFE member Debbie Simpers died, and she died suddenly. And Debbie had preached a sermon she was going to submit to this group in a competition. And for those who didn't know Debbie, Debbie was born with spina bifida, and by the time she was in her 40s, she had both legs amputated, so she used a motorized wheelchair. I know she's preached up in Chestertown. She was an incredible leader here at UUFE. So Debbie had preached this sermon just about her life in general, in part about her disability, and was going to submit it. So I called them and said, can we submit it posthumously? And they said, okay, but she can't be in the competition. But they invited me to a service where she was honored, and it was a place where you built relationships, you built connection. So that's why I go to this workshop every year. And the session this year included the history of the disability movement. It had practical advice for congregations on adaptations for mobility and vision and hearing impairment, and all sorts of a range of different things that make it harder for some folks to navigate our congregations. So that was part of it, and they talked also about mask wearing, why it's sometimes hard for people to wear masks if you can't put your own mask on and off. So it's always a reminder that everybody is facing a different pattern out there. But the minister, what I want to talk a little bit about is Reverend Suzanne Fast talked about the underlying theology. What is it about our theology, our faith, that calls us to the work of inclusion? What is it, particularly when we think about folks living with disabilities? She started by saying something that's really stuck with me. She said that we often think of disability as a defect rather than an aspect of human variation. Disability, another difference versus a defect. So I'm just going to touch my computer because it went a little bit light here. And that really has stuck with me because it brings us to some of the other things we've talked about over the years. Sometimes we decide something is normal. White, middle class, something is normal, and other things we push to the side and consider them something other. It's a challenge for us to say, who is we when we think about our congregations, when we think about our society more broadly? She asked us to answer a really, really basic question. What does it mean to be a human being? And can some people be more human than others? We know the answer to that is, of course not. And yet sometimes our behaviors don't match that when we think about adaptations and when we think about what deep inclusion means. Ableism is defined, she says, as discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities across the whole physical, the mental spectrum. So as we think about diversity and equity and inclusion, we have to think about ways that barriers to access are dehumanizing. Does somebody even have to ask to be included, or did we anticipate the full range of human diversity would be joining us? Important questions, I think, at the heart of all the work we do on equity. I started looking at their current website, Equal Access's website, and the sermon winner, the winner for the 2020 sermon, was a woman named Elizabeth Foster, and she's a seminary student. And she talks about her excitement of getting into Boston University's theological school and then finding the only door that she could go in was way around to the back, way far away, time-consuming, dangerous. Folks, we sometimes say we want the full spectrum, but we don't make it easy. The universal message I heard from Reverend Fast and many speakers at GA talking on things other than disabilities was we need to pay attention from perspectives from those who have been and have lived at the margin. It's about that paying attention, about that intentionality. She reminds us it's that shared living experience that makes us a vibrant community collectively. Not them and us. Everybody collectively brings forward this vibrance. We need to always be asking not just who is missing at the table, but why. And we need to get to the stories, to look at the root causes of places where people have been excluded. Earlier in his reflection, Dick mentioned the widening the circle work, the work on the Commission by Institutional Change. And they have been very systemic at doing these, because if you're going to work on the issues, you need to know not only the stories, you need to know why the problem exists and what those, both at the margins and what we all want to achieve by the changes. Because intentional work comes with why questions. If we don't, we just keep circling back. So when we get to the work of all equity, it does involve engagement with others. It involves collaboration. It involves collaboration for folks that are dealing with a certain struggle, for those of us who aren't as aware as we need to be. And the engagement part can be daunting, especially I think of some of the questions around racism. Some of us want to avoid the conflict. We really don't want to stir the boat that day, and that ended up with me attending that part of my inner voice that can preach about one thing, but how do you really sometimes do it? It brought me to a workshop that was led by a gentleman named Chris Crass. He's done a huge amount of this work, both in our denomination throughout the country on anti-racism. And the workshop was titled Having Anti-Racist Conversations. It was predominantly a sermon about white people talking to white people. And I came away with three learnings from this workshop. First, Chris Crass says, be strategic about your use of energy. Be intentional. Don't spend a lot of time trying to engage somebody who is not open to learning. Somebody who is clearly set in their position. Just don't. You can try to deflect the conversations. They may be conversations that need to be deflected, but trying to convince or trying to educate or figure out that conversation probably isn't the best use of your time. Second, when you engage with somebody who might be open, remember you don't know it all. Start with that listening. Start with hearing where they are, start with some open-ended questions. Start there. And third, know why you are personally pulled to anti-racism work. What is the emotional drive you have that is undergirding your work there? What is keeping you in that conversation, in that work? Because you need to know where your own heart is. And if you can share that story with somebody, that will keep the conversation open. While it wasn't about racism, as I had gone to this workshop, it got me thinking about my own interest in the work of dismantling some of the ableist actions that are out there, some of the presumptions that everybody could walk and see and hear and speak all the same way. And I realized my story with Debbie, my relationship to Debbie, is part of the types of stories he was talking about, where I remember hearing places she felt included, places she felt excluded, what it felt like if people had to move things, they hadn't anticipated the size of the aisle, people parking in your parking space. I think all of those things are important as we look at opening sometimes hard conversations. So think, what is your story? And then how do you intentionally tell that story that pulls you into the work? It might start with, I get angry when, or I recall in a classroom once, or I remember learning about. Because I think that also reminds ourselves that we're not trying to do it all, but we need to trust where we're being intentionally led, and then trust that we can make a difference. As I've been processing General Assembly and writing the sermon today, I've thought a lot about guiding messages. And I came across this message in one of the many tributes to Representative John Lewis. It was a quote that he had. He actually tweeted this fairly recently in 2018. Don't get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. We're pulled to do our part, to leave things better, but we should know it's never going to exactly be finished. And where we put our attention, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's family scenarios that need attention, lots of times many things need attention. We should know our attention can't be everywhere, but where we put it, then we actually watch the whole video and take the time to engage and think about it. When we trust that our attention matters and we give it just to where we can, we will make a difference. I think we'll be more relaxed, we'll be more comfortable. So in gratitude to the contributions today from Dick, Ann, and Carl, and for those who made virtual General Assembly possible, those who made virtual General Assembly possible, may it be so. So today we do not have any specific announcements of anything particularly new, but we do ask folks to keep reading the newsletter. Even if you haven't regularly been a newsletter reader, it is our way of communicating in these challenging times. I do want to remind everybody, in my June 21st service, I asked everybody to consider, if you were wanting to work on dismantling racism, what's your one thing? Not your 5 things, whatever, but what's your one thing? And I am holding sessions on the first Wednesday of every month. The next one will be on August 5th. And that will be a chance, we just do a brief reflection. It's fine to bring your questions. It's fine not to have settled on something. But part of that is to keep momentum going. I think a lot of times one of the messages from GA is we miss continuity because we have a lot of stops because people say we're not doing it perfectly. We'll never do it perfectly, but it's a chance to reflect on that. So I invite you to that session. I extinguish the chalice with more words from John Lewis. You are a light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen, dim, or diminish your light. Study the path of others to make your way easier and more abundant. We extinguish our chalice with his words. Go in peace. Go in love. Go knowing love surrounds you wherever you may go. Blessings.
Oh, well, I know I can't do this all by myself. Oh, glory, hallelujah. It's a long, hard journey, gonna need some help. Glory, hallelujah, I'm ready to go. Well, I've been sitting here thinking about the word of the day. Oh, glory, hallelujah. Got friends by my side, and I'm blessed to say, glory, hallelujah, I'm ready to go. Oh, mama, it's a long, long road. You got me singing with the seed you sowed. Talk to me, so come what may. Glory, hallelujah, it's a righteous day. Glory, hallelujah, I'm on my way. Oh, 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 mama, it's a long, long road. You got me singing with the seed you sowed. Talk to me, so come what may. Glory, hallelujah, it's a righteous day. Glory, hallelujah, I'm on my way. Ba-da-da-ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-da.